Hello everyone and welcome to Ovarian Cancer Australia's Information and Support webinar. My name is Vanessa Alford and I'm part of the support team at OCA. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're on and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. This webinar will focus on the sexual challenges and issues faced by women with ovarian cancer and the impact this may have on quality of life. We have three incredible presenters who are going to share some valuable information with you. We're extremely grateful for the funding received for this webinar from AstraZeneca. The webinar is interactive, so over the next hour, you can ask questions to the presenters by using the dark blue hand icon at the top of your screen. Questions will be answered at the end of each speaker's presentation. Please note that speakers cannot address individual medical cases. If you have a particular question, please call the Ovarian Cancer Australia Information and Support line on 1300 660 334. For technical assistance during the webinar, please phone Redback Support on 1800 733 416. So I'm extremely privileged to introduce our speakers to you. Our first speaker is Dr Amanda Hordern, a leading expert who strives to lift the lid off the great taboo of sex and cancer. Amanda will discuss strategies to help you reclaim your sexual confidence and desire and boost your self-esteem and energy. Our second speaker is Tori Wood-Bellentina, a postgraduate sexology student at Curtin University with expertise in lubricants. Through her years working at Passionfruit, the Sensuality Shop, Tori has helped many people through various health and vaginal dryness issues. Tori will discuss the different types of lubricants and their uses. We will then hear from Amy Phillips, a 46-year-old mother of three who was diagnosed with stage 3C ovarian cancer in 2020. Amy will share her experience and the effects that ovarian cancer and the treatment has had on her identity and self-esteem and the impact that it's had on her relationship with her husband of nearly 20 years. So I'd like to hand over the microphone to Dr. Amanda Hordern. Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. And welcome, a huge welcome to tonight's great topic. It's very exciting to be able to talk about it in an honest and open and warm way. The thing is, we're bombarded about sexuality wherever we go. I mean, sex sells white goods. It's hard to work out what this woman's actually selling, whether it's a big turkey or that deodorant, but it's all around us. And no matter where we look, we're bombarded by the images that are wrinkle-free, pube-free, disease-free, scar-free, flab-free. And as we go to images like this one, where it's hard to wonder what on earth she is selling, most of us are wondering, has she got a G-string on? And we will never know the answer. But when we have these superficial images all around us, bus stops, magazines, advertising of all different sorts, it's hard for each of us as mere humans to think of ourselves as sexual beings when we're older, when we've been through diseases and health challenges like many of you have here today. This beautiful photo was sent to me from a New Zealand palliative care hospice where I went and spoke to the nurses in palliative care, one of the greatest taboos about worrying about sexuality and intimacy in the moments that you have left in life. And the family said to me, said via this nurse, said the one thing that their mum wanted to do was to be able to just lie back in a warm bubble bath, have a no disturb sign on the door for half an hour, and to have a tiara, something that she thought she was entitled to receive. And they said that she actually did die with a beautiful smile on her face. So sexuality is all around us, and it's experienced and expressed in our thoughts, in our fantasies, in our desires, in our belief, our attitudes, our values. This is a really great World Health Organization definition of sexuality is pretty much whatever you want it to be. I always have a little bit of a chuckle when I think about the World Health Organization sitting around a bureaucratic table just trying to decide what it is. 2002 was the last definition. And what we really know is it means different things to different people at different stages of our life. So all of you listening to this today and this evening will have a different definition of what sex means to you right now and what you do want to change. And it's way beyond sexual penetration. And I'm going to call on the wonderful OCA research that was just published only a couple of weeks ago. So some of your quotes may have been captured in this, saying that it's more than penetration. It's about our values. As this woman said, I try and keep our sex life going because I know how important it is for my partner. The other one says, my husband pulls away every time I get bad news. So it involves our communication as well as our values. And it involves how we feel about ourselves as a woman. I don't feel the least bit feminine or care about my appearance like I used to, said another woman. I have no ovaries, so I feel less of a woman. So it affects the way we feel ourselves in a gender way, as well as in a way that we socialize with other people. As this beautiful, very moving quote said, it's just like a lump. I've grown a lump of death, and it was very hard, and I've become socially withdrawn. So as we focus on these quotes, which I'm bombarded with quite often in research and in my own clinical practice, that for some people, sex just becomes a job that I must perform. Well, that's what they usually come to me for. Other people say, I just hate the way I look and feel. I mean, look at my hair and look at my body and look at my weight gain. One woman said to me, I thought you were supposed to wither away when you got cancer, and look at all this. This is the cancer. Other people have said to me quite often, men and women, I cannot even look in the mirror. Some people cover the mirror up and try and remove and get a shock if they're actually seeing their reflection in a passing shop window. Whereas other people have worked out a way to say that these scars are a lifeline. And this was a beautiful quote that also came from the OCA research. So what do people want to know after cancer, and how does that relate to intimacy and sexuality? Well, from the intimacy and sexuality perspective, most people are saying, how do I deal with these changes in my body, in my mind, in my energy, in my libido, in my focus? And is it even okay to worry about how I look when I should be so grateful and thankful to the medical people who have kept me alive? Will I ever feel sexy again is what I'm often asked. And how do other people cope in these situations, which is why it's so fantastic to have this forum here today. How do I move forward when I feel so stuck and overwhelmed and bombarded and just burdened by all that's happened since my ovarian cancer? And are there practical strategies that I can put in place today that will assist me to just move forward and feel less stuck and open my mind and my body to a hope? And the answer is yes, there are. Well, we've learned from a lot of the research in older people facing cancer, and I've learned this from a lot of women in the lesbian support groups that we used to run at the Cancer Council, was that as we grow older, we have more capacity to become more comfortable in our body and in our mind, and to explore new erogenous zones and ways of expressing intimacy. If that's what we want in our mind, then our body can start to follow. But the problem is that, as this wonderful man, Dr. Joe Dispenza, who's a neuroscientist, said in one of his books, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself and You Are the Placebo Effect, he said the problem is that most of us each and every day, we get out of bed the same way, we brush our teeth the same way, we brush our hair, we put our makeup on the same way, we push the coffee machine the same way. So our brain is always fired for cue, trigger and response, cue, trigger and response. And a lot of his research is showing that mostly 60 to 70,000 thoughts are what we have per day, and about 90% of them are repeated every day, again and again and again. And that's okay if our thoughts are working for us rather than against us. But what I learned in counselling decades and decades ago, when a woman just threw these books to wake me up out of my dazed state as a student, she said, well, 90% of your clients' issues are going to be in the past and only 10% of them about today. So often we're operating on unconscious habits, programs, and thought viruses that can just immobilize us. And then we have the cancer layer on top of that. So what do I mean by that? We've often got a very loud me, an inner critic that's always saying bad things about ourselves. And what we come to realize from counseling and from hypnotherapy and neuro-linguistic programming is that 90% of that can happen from the school ground. It can happen from being bullied, having a mean teacher, having a very traumatic relationship breakdown. So our past can often govern how you're feeling about the cancer today and how your potential then to unblock or to unstick yourself from a lot of the beliefs and habits and behaviours and patterns that weren't even yours to carry. So the good news about this is that we can start to, or what happens is we're often thinking the top two things, what if I'm no good at sex, and what if I disappoint my partner, which you saw in a lot of those themes that I was showing from our own research at the OCA. What if my body lets me down? What if I make things worse for my relationship with myself, for my body, for my cancer? Will I ever get back to who I was? Are the constant themes that come into my clinical practice. And the truth is that most of those thoughts operate from a place of fear. And of course, it's often very burdensome and hard work to actually not only get over the shock and the trauma and the high hypervigilance that can happen in the cancer experience of just going treatment after treatment and bad news after bad news. So often our brain starts to just be on that high alert, like just waiting for the next bad news or waiting for the next bit of information or the next word that you don't understand in the cancer experience. And so FEAR can quite simply stand for false expectation appears real. But like Susan Jeffries said in her book way back in the 80s, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And she said, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's working out that there's something much more important than the fear, and that will align you to making a different choice in your brain, and your body will follow. So what she was really saying is we can all of us have the choice to stay in this space if that serves you, if that suits you, and if that's okay with you, and mostly if it's okay with you and or your partner. But we can flip the fear and we can start to think about not what you don't want, but what you do want. So when people come into my practice as a sexual counsellor, or with the new role that I'm playing at the OCA as a sexual counsellor, I'm often bombarded by a shopping list of everything that they don't want. Low energy, low libido, problems with intimacy, feeling really bad about the body, not even interested, not in desire, letting partnerships down. And so compassionately, of course, I listen to that, and then I just take a big deep breath and I say, just for a second, if we could just put that aside for a moment, what would you really like to focus on here today? What would you want to put energy into? Because energy flows where attention goes. How will you know when you have that? What will that outcome allow you to be, to do, to feel? So rather than what you don't want, we're trying to shift the focus to what you do want and how that will serve you and how that will bring joy or happiness or peace and acceptance into your body. Some of the other things that we work on over a series of often 3 to 6 sessions is just bringing people out of their brain of that hypervigilance and high alert of more bad news and more difficulties and challenges in the health spectrum, from the ovarian cancer to just teaching people how to breathe back into their body. And that allows us to get out of our head brain and into our body. Often that needs a little bit of guidance, and we do practical kind of reinforcement strategies that can help you along the way. The other thing to do is trying to allow people that's moving from what you don't want to just bringing more and more of the joy back from the head into the body. So in sex therapy and sex counseling, there are classic kind of steps that we walk you through where it's called sensate focus techniques, where we're just shifting from the horror and the fear and the trauma of all that you've been grappling with and the overload and the overwhelm to just coming back into the body, to get comfortable with scars, to dress up or dress down, to play with lube that Tori's going to talk to you about, to explore different textures and different vibrations and sensations on the skin. So in fact, from a neuro-linguistic and neuroplastic modality, it's to reignite and reconnect with the body and the mind. And to rebuild the sexual awareness, one of the biggest steps that we often say to people, why don't we put the intercourse goal off the radar for now, if it is one of your goals, and just focus on starting to be feeling more comfortable and more courageous and more confident in your body. How do we do that? I try and find out from people before all of this happened, what used to make you laugh? What used to make you feel connected with a partner if you happen to have one? If you are looking for a partner, what are the kind of qualities that you would like to have now? Not what you don't want, but what you do want. And obviously setting the scene with the mind of changing the lighting, putting music on, having warmth in the body, and trying to remind people that you're not being marked on this, that have a go yourself. And then if you have a partner, if you choose to invite a partner into your sensual and intimate space, then you can guide them as to what feels comfortable and what is actually feeling aroused or just slightly interesting or curious in the body as a new pathway from the mind to the body. So what we're really saying is that we're trying to step people through not what you don't want, but what you do want. So being less critical of yourself. Sometimes my clients really beat themselves up with those negative thought viruses and the things they say about themselves. And after I've heard a few of them, I just say, just just stop and just repeat that to yourself again. Would you ever say that to a friend? Would you ever say that to somebody who you really love? And of course, the answer is always no. I would never do that. I would never speak to somebody like that. So it's trying to focus on things that you feel grateful for. And there's lots of positive psychology that shows that by starting the day and ending the day with 3 things that you feel grateful for, quite literally starts to shift the focus to some of the things that you have in your power to change. Other activities that I say to clients when they're really overwhelmed and exhausted, like many of you may be tonight, let's just download a huge list of all that's going on in your head for the next minute. So we put the stopwatch on for a minute, write, or you tell me and I'll write for you. And then I hand it back to them and I say, okay, let's put a red line through everything that you have no control over. And it's a really effective technique of working out what you have power over and what you don't have power over. Because energy flows where attention goes. And if you move from overwhelm to what you do have power over, you're more likely to make one change that will lead to another and lead to another. The other thing that I say to people is let's focus, even if that's one of your end goals of what you'd like, what are some of the micro goals along the way, the micro steps? I think it was Confucius who said a long time ago that, every journey of 1,000 miles begins with one foot after the other. So it's one breath after the other, one stroke after the other, one step after the other. Allowing yourself to have a good support system around you is a fundamental thing just to lower anxiety. And even allowing yourself to ask for and receive help is a thing that many, many women in society struggle with, and especially when you're very vulnerable and feeling very exhausted as well. So what I'm really trying to say over the last couple of minutes is that sexuality means different things to each of you who are listening to this now. And so if sexuality and intimacy is a priority, it's working out what you do want and starting to chunk that down into a couple of manageable steps, working with a therapist, working with somebody who's got some experience to assist you to break it down and to start to move out of the head that's traumatized and back into your body until you can start to feel a spark of possibility. What we know from some of the amazing research that's out there with a lot of the MRIs now is that if you can conceive something mentally, there's incredible research that Professor Beverly Whipple taught us this, that women can have full-blown orgasms just by conceiving something in their minds, and they can have a full-blown orgasm under an MRI. What the research also showed that a lot of the people who they did research on in Professor Beverly Whipple's studies were deemed to be unable to orgasm or to be stimulated because many of them were quadriplegics. So we now know that if we can conceive something mentally and if we can light up new and, sparking areas in the body, then not when you're exhausted, and experiment with new positions and set the goal for pleasure rather than performance, then you're more likely to find the fun and the joy back in that. So in summary, because we're all got a very strict timeline here, it's about working with your strengths. So working out what you do like. And there was a beautiful woman who's very bravely put her hand up at the end of one of my seminars. And she said, it's exactly what you were saying, that sex is way more than penetration. And so it was a big audience, 500 people. And she said, do you want to know what sex is for us? And I must confess that we all kind of breathed in and just waited for her answer. And her husband was just poking her in the ribs like this, winking at her like this. And she said, we just close our eyes every morning for 3 minutes a day, and we breathe in together and we breathe out together, and we breathe in together and we breathe out together. And for 3 minutes a day, that's what sexuality means to us. And then we get on with our day and we feel deeply connected. The funny thing about the story was that he came and said to me later, the truth is it's the only way to keep her quiet for 3 minutes a day. But he said it with such love, and he went running, literally skipping off into the sunset, holding her hand. So it's not selfish to focus on you first. There's some wonderful resources. The OCA, beautiful book, the Body Image, Relationships and Ovarian Cancer book that just got released. There's a Cancer Council one on fertility, which I was also involved in writing. And there's this fantastic Teal support program that all of you know about. I've just come to get to know it. That's my timer to say stop. And I'm now recently been appointed as the sex therapist for the sessions. So I look forward to speaking to you if that's something that you'd like to work through some of these sessions as well. Thanks for your time, and look forward to your questions now. Thank you, Vanessa.
Well, thank you so much, Amanda. Amazing how much you can fit in 15 minutes. What an extremely informative presentation. Thank you so much. And we are so fortunate to have you, the OCA, to have you as our sexual counsellor. So very, very fortunate indeed. We just have one question. How does our mind get in the way of our desires?
Well, it's a good question. It nearly always gets in the way of our desires, and it's pretty much what we were saying. It's the fear, the false expectation appears real, or the actual drama, the facts that have been laid up until this point. So it's the focus of the brain on what we don't want rather than what we do want. And even when I teach that in communication skills, even all of us, we get fixated on what we don't want, what isn't working, what if I stuff it up, what if I get it wrong, fear of failure. So the biggest thing is to just change the mind to something, even if it's one micro or macro step forward, that can work for somebody, that can quite literally open up the brain to new possibilities, and it starts to think, what next? You know, it's more suggestible and more open to a new lived experience, whatever that might be for you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Amanda. Really appreciate your time this evening. We will now move on to our second speaker. I'd like to hand the microphone over to Tori Wood-Bellentina. Thank you, Tori.
Hi, everyone. My name's Tori. Thanks for the introduction, Vanessa. I am going to be talking to you about lubeology today. So lube is a very under-researched area. We are kind of always trying to find little nitpicks, and there's people over the world who we've all been sharing our resources. So it's a really difficult one. It gets a little bit scientific, but I implore you to press on with it. My slides are quite comprehensive. I would recommend to maybe go back and look at some of them, especially when we're talking about chemical ingredients. But I'm going to push on because I've only got 15 minutes and I could talk about this for hours. So why we use lube? Now, lube can sometimes have a little bit of a taboo to it. I often hear a lot of people be like, oh, I feel like that's a failure on my part, that I would need that. And there are people of all ages and makes that are using lubricant. It's not necessarily about needing it. It can be sometimes about wanting it, because what it brings to an intimate experience is something that is a more tactile, more increasing of pleasure, and it also benefits in terms of how we're using our bodies. Less abrasions, less micro tears, less infections, because they make our sexual barriers even more, beneficial in a sense. And there's some really great readings on that, which I've put in my sources. But it can also act as a bit of a moisturizer. It can be this beneficial thing that we're using as a lubrication and something to help our mucous membranes and our vaginal walls become a little bit more moist, a little bit healthier, and a little bit more elasticity, especially as we have that estrogen removed, as we've had surgeries, there's scarring, and we need to nurture that ecosystem that's been a little bit damaged. So lube can have so many great health benefits to it, as well as intimacy and pleasure, as well as your daily wear as well. So I've got some, dilators and a little clitoral vibrator here, which obviously combined with lube is a beautiful experience and should always be explored. Now I'm going to talk about the lubricant family. There are 4 types of lubricants, and of course there are subcategories that we expect like to break them down into again, but there is water-based, there's silicone, oils, and hybrids, and I'm going to go into these a lot more in depth a little bit later, but that's the 4 major ones. And this is the criteria that we talk about lubricants. Does it match your pH? Is the osmolality a good, healthy match? And osmolality is a really technical sciencey term, which I'm going to break down for you as well. And are the ingredients safe and hypoallergenic? And does it match my lifestyle? Now, this becomes a really unique question. Your lifestyle could mean the type of intimacy that you're involved with, how you deliver your pleasure, if you're solo play, if you have a partner, if you have partners, and then the type of play that you're using, whether you're using devices or if you're using dilators. The world is your oyster. And so sometimes a lubricant will be more specific to a type of action or a type of play that you're doing. So this is also part of the whole conversation. I've got a pH testing kit here that I always recommend for people who get really sensitive with pH, which I'll go into. And so let's get into pH. So our bodies, we vary for pH. The vagina is quite acidic, so a lubricant should be matching in that acidity. But we often will find with these natural organic types of lubes, they will be at a pH of 7, which is just going to boost our vaginal pH up higher and increase our risk of bacteria growth, and thus in giving us infections and bacterial vaginosis at a higher rate. Now, we definitely don't want this, especially when you're going through a difficult time in life and you are maybe immunocompromised. We want to be able to nurture that ecosystem and keep it healthy. I do have a couple of clients that get really sensitive to pH changes, and they may be using a pH lube at the start and then a different one at the end of the month, and they will rotate as they find that their body is changing. Even if you are still menstruating, or even if you feel you have deep hormonal changes still, this is something that could affect that pH. So if you are someone that just really is struggling with a lubricant and you've tried 100 of them and sometimes they seem to work and sometimes they don't, I highly recommend getting into pH testing and just tracking it for about a month, and you'll be able to figure it out if that is the case. So let's go into osmolality. Now, hopefully I won't bore you too much with the science here. Essentially, osmolality is how we absorb content. So our vaginal mucous membranes and everything is making a really lovely material, and that is absorbed at a certain rate, which is the osmolality rating. What we want is a lubricant that matches that. Now, in Australia, unfortunately, there is nothing that is perfect, because this is something that's not highly important to a lot of lube companies, unfortunately. There are some that really strive to make a really great osmolality. However, it's not always the way. So we have hyper, iso, and hypo. And I'm going to explain these. Essentially, this is what we have most of our lubes at, like the cheap ones that we find in the supermarket. And what they're doing is they're pulling water from our vaginal mucosa and our mucus cells and our vaginal walls. So essentially what they're doing is drying us out and creating more problems. It's exacerbating an already existing condition often. When that cell is damaged and that mucus has been pulled out and it's now dry, you are more prone to microabrasions and discomfort, which then in turn make you more susceptible to transferable STIs, as well as just infections and abrasions. What we really want to avoid in any case is to just not have to go through this. So hypoosmotic lubes often will bring that about. Then we will have my slides have gone all the way to the very beginning. My apologies. I don't know why it did that. I've got the bad luck today. But the next one we're going to be talking about is hypoosmotic lubes. Hypoosmotic lubes are a good and a bad thing. So when we have a cell that is dry and needs that mucosa, needs a little bit of pumping up, so to speak, we can get a lube that is slightly hypoosmotic, and that's going to moisturize and heal that cell. And then we've got this nice little pumping up, this nice little hydration, and then that should be able to support that being healthy plump tissue and helping elasticity and lubrication. However, if we go too far on the hypoosmotic scale, we end up absorbing too much content, and that cell kind of bursts like a balloon, and it can damage the cell, and it doesn't often repair itself. So we can then again exacerbate conditions. Now, there are some hypoosmotic lubes are quite rare. We don't have many that are listed in the list of hypoosmotic ones. However, there is belief that the oils tend to be a bit more hypoosmotic, and it's unfortunate we haven't got a lot of testing done on those yet. The next one is the isoosmotic. Now, this is our gold standard. This is what we would love for all of our lubes to be. However, it is very rare, and what this is doing is a lovely little recycled effect. It's basically the same osmosity as what we already produce naturally, and it's this nice little recycled effect. It's coming back and forth, and then just working with the cell to assist you and the lubrication that is there to make sex comfortable, to make sex accessible, as well as, you know, use with toys and dilators. So this is the ideal. And I do have a couple of ones that I've suggested down under here, should you want to explore those options. Now, to get into the lube family, now water-based lube. Now, I was talking about that 4 criteria: pH, osmolality, and ingredients. the water-based lube needs to really be covering all of these bases. Now, this is the hardest one to pick for yourself, and we don't all have chemistry degrees and backgrounds in science and figuring out how this works. So it's often really difficult to figure out. And there is a little bit of work on all of our behalves to have to figure out what works for us. Unfortunately, with water-based lubes, these tend to be very cheaply made, and they tend to be the most that hyperosmotic. So they're going to damage that cell as well. Now, I do have on here just a list of ingredients, and this is ones that I implore people to double check their lubricants, grab out the bottle of lube that they're using, and double check that none of these ingredients are in there. The reason being, these ingredients often will come in and kill healthy bacteria. They will interfere with the natural mucosa. They will increase our risk of micro tears and BV, bacterial vaginosis, as well as ingredients that are highly irritating. So they can induce a dermatitis response. They can make us itchy, and that can be, you know, exacerbating a condition that's already there, which we really, really want to avoid. So there is often not this gold standard, and there's a lot of companies that just make things to sell things, and they're not actually thinking about how this works in the body. The next one is silicone lube. Now, I often have a lot of people, when I'm talking about this, often gasp, like, oh, I don't want to use silicone. It doesn't feel natural. It's not a natural ingredient. It's not good for my body. And I really, really implore people once again to try this out. Basically, we can veto the pH and the osmolality when it comes to silicone lube because it doesn't apply to the situation. This is a great lube that comes in, it creates a beautiful, soft, silky texture over the skin, and then it allows for really long-term use. So we find a lot of people are great in using this in daily wear for long-term use as well as in intimacy as well. Unfortunately, they don't work with silicone toys or dilators, but it's a wonderful thing to be able to apply it and know that it's not going to run out. These will absorb in terms of how they evaporate more so than absorb. So they're evaporating, and it depends on the molecule size of how that works. And this is another tricky one to figure out, but you can always talk to a lube specialist and they will be able to figure out that molecular size of how these work. And that's just generally by deciphering ingredients. The next lube is hybrid lubes. Now, these are very rare. You only find them in specialist stores like Passionfruit and a few others. And this is a mixture of the silicone and the water. So what it's giving you is that little bit of a safety net, is what to describe it as. That demikethone that is in the silicone agent is acting in that water base as like an option that's, if everything was to absorb, you've still got this tiny little bit of helping hand. And this can be a great way to use with dilators for people who are finding water-based is just not working with them. And you've got a really nice, long-lasting, healthy lubricant there that's not dominating in terms of silicone use. The last one that I have, which is quite popular, especially when I'm meeting people going through different types of cancer treatment, is oil-based lubes. I have a pretty harsh belief on oil-based lubes. I always think it is the last resort. I believe in what I've researched and looked into is that it should be a last resort. You should try the water, you should try the silicone, you should try the hybrids, and the oil is the last resort because it's a huge band-aid. It's often over moisturizing. It can often be a little bit too hydrating, and there is belief that it's operating on that really low hypoosmotic side where it may be pulling off a layer of skin as it sheds from the body. Often we are finding people using food grade materials which are not formulated for the body and can increase our pH quite dramatically and increase our risk of bacteria growth and negative bacteria growth as well. So I'm going to chat through a few of my resources here. There is really little research on osmolality and lubes, and companies don't have to be transparent about this, but there are great resources online, Dangerous Lily, Smitten Kitten, and Passionfruit as well, where we have done our little bits of osmolality research and pH, so you can look up brands. The best way to kind of figure out how this is going to work with you is to often find your lube that you're really wanting to use and try, do your research, look over the ingredients, find something from that similar range if it's not exactly on there, and you can be able to find out what's in there. Some companies are pretty transparent if you email them directly and just ask, like, let me know, what's the osmolality on this? How is this going to work? What's the pH? And most will tell you. They just don't make it publicly available, unfortunately. So here's a couple of what these graphs will look like. A quick Google search should be able to give you some insight. However, you can always just talk to a sexologist. Specialists in lubricants are always available for private consultations and things like that. And sometimes it's really worth it if you are struggling. But I'm going to hand you back to Vanessa. But thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Tori, for that very extremely valuable presentation and very informative. We just have one question. Just a reminder to everyone that you can post a question to the speakers by using the blue hand icon at the top of your screen. Just one question. Do you have an opinion on homemade lubes and some of the coconut oils that are used?
Yes, I touched on it very briefly. It's one of these things that I feel has a bit of history to it. Historically, we would have had, 20, 30, 40 years ago, we didn't have great lubricants available to us. And it was a means to an end. It was something when you're going through painful menopause or when you're going through painful vaginal dryness, you could turn to a coconut oil or an olive oil in the cupboard, and it was enough to just kind of kill the pain because it's better than suffering in silence. However, now we have advanced, there's more research, there's more things coming out, things are better formulated. It's definitely 100 times better if you want to push through those and give them a try. The homemade ones, they're often, you're not going to find that perfect osmolality and pH, and that's the main two things that you really want to be focusing on. Generally, I'm always just anti-coconut oil. The World Health Organization have done really good research onto that because it's so popular, and they are finding it does increase bacterial vaginosis by 40%. So as a long-term use, it can also become quite addictive in terms of hydration to the body. It can create the body to basically slack off and stop doing its job in maintaining its ecosystem because it's like, well, something's here doing the job for me. So I'm very, very anti coconut oil lubes and homemade ones.
Thank you very much, Tori. That's very helpful. And thanks again for joining us on the webinar. I'd now like to hand over to our final speaker, Amy Phillips. Thank you, Amy.
It's great. Thanks, Vanessa. And wow, that's a lot of information to take in so far this evening, and I'm really looking forward to going back and watching it again, particularly what you've just had to say, Tori. There's a lot there that I had no idea about, so that's fantastic. I guess just by way of introduction, as Vanessa said earlier, my name's Amy Phillips, and I'm a 46-year-old who lives in Canberra with my husband Simon and my 3 boys who are 10, 16 and 17. And, through the course of this journey of mine, I have been incredibly blessed to have had my best friend walk with me and support me all the way. He shared every minute of every single challenge. And for those of you who do have your partners with you, you'll know too, like they walk every step of the path and they go through every challenge with you. And then when I said to my husband Simon, tonight I'm going to come along, I'm going to speak on this topic, he wasn't super thrilled because I guess, let's be honest, it's a pretty personal and private thing to talk about. But I did assure him that I wouldn't talk about our sex life to the world, and that really that the audience is a kind one, and that those of you who are listening tonight, what we're going through, and you're probably treading a fairly similar path. And I guess one thing I've learned over the last couple of years, it's really important to hear the stories of other people as well, because then you're not on your own, and you're not alone when we face these challenges that this horrible disease throws at us. So just by way of context and give you a bit of information of where I've come from. So I was diagnosed in early 2020 with stage 3C ovarian cancer. And I headed off fairly quickly to have surgery in Sydney, and major surgery, so full hysterectomy, oophorectomy. I had 14 lymph nodes removed, and it was a really long recovery. Like it really did take months for that pain to go away. And as those of you who've had the surgery know, you end up with this dirty great scar that's sort of from your belly button down to the top of your pubic bone. And looking at that in the mirror to begin with, it's this constant reminder of, you know, what you've just experienced and where you're at, because obviously with that diagnosis comes that real initial shock and change of life. So then for me, I started pretty quickly within 6 weeks, I'd started my first lot of chemotherapy. And I had the standard carboplatin paclitaxel regimen once every 3 weeks. And that was really tough, you know, having 1 week out of 3 being completely flat, constantly, you know, constipated. I suffered a lot with constipation, and I was still in pain, still recovering from the surgery to begin with. And I guess too, that was that first experience of losing my hair that came with that dreaded paclitaxel. And, you know, I guess for me, I'd always had long hair, and that in terms of identity for me, it was my hair that made me feel attractive. I used to have long red hair to begin with, and then as I started to grey, long blonde hair. And for me, that was, I guess, really central to making me feel attractive. And so losing my hair, I thought, okay, you know, we're going through this process to get to an end to make me well. I can do that. And so I embraced the whole idea of wigs. Thought, you beauty, this will be fun. I can try different colours, I can try different lengths. And I went wig shopping. Went down to the local wig shop where the lady there helps a lot of women with cancer. And I also did a bit of online shopping and learned very quickly that what you pay for is what you get when it comes to wigs. But I thought, well, I'll turn this into a bit of fun. And then I rocked up to try on these wigs, and that was great. And the lady there at the wig shop sort of said, oh, how about we clipper your hair off so that you can fit the wig on nicely. And by this stage, I had been to the hairdressers and had my hair cut short in anticipation of losing it. So that was one dramatic step. And I just sort of got caught in the moment and was like, yeah, sure. So then I've rocked up home with basically a bald head and a wig. And I had by that stage, I'd had a couple of old wigs in the cupboard that I'd used for certain things. And so I thought, great, I'll be able to change it up. I'll make my look different, until my 10-year-old said, no, I like that one wig and that's the one you're wearing and that's it. So I adopted the longish red, sort of burgundy red bob wig, and that was me for the time until I got through that lot of chemotherapy and my hair did start to grow back. And I guess too, like I would look in the mirror and I would think, I don't know if I like what I see, and surely it looks obvious I've got a wig on, but nobody would know. But the point was I knew, and it wasn't what I wanted to look like. But then I sort of got through that lot of chemo, and you know, I was well, and my hair started to grow back, and everything started to get back to normal. And then it was a case of, well, now I can start, you know, moving back into my sex life with my husband, which had really been on hold for the previous 6 months while I was recovering and going through that treatment period, only then to find out within 5 months my cancer had come back, and it's now spread to the different lymph nodes throughout my body. So it was basically back into more chemotherapy, which was really really scary at the time and really tough to know that it had come back. And oh my goodness, now what? Just when I'd started to get my life back on track and my hair had started to grow back and I was starting to feel more normal, here we go again. And I guess too, the hard part was it's now not about curing my cancer, it's now about monitoring and controlling. So therefore, I will live with this thing for the rest of my life. So, and around about this time, I started this next lot of chemo, which was a carbo-calyx once every month regimen for 6 months. I had my port put in, and I think you can possibly see it here. It's quite pronounced and prominent. And when I first had it put in, that was basically what I would see in the mirror. Was I had gotten past looking at my scar to now having this dirty grey lump thing on my chest. And every time I looked in the mirror, I saw it, and it just, you know, it really upset me, I think, more than it should have. I guess too, maybe because it was a reminder, and there's some other women I know who had a port as well, had said once they got through their cancer, after 12 months they had the port taken out, Whereas I knew very much that if I'm going to live with this disease, then I won't be getting this port taken out. It'll be there forever, which was really tough too. And so I guess after I had that next 6 months of chemo, I then, again, really, when you're going through that, I guess, and you would, those of you who've had treatment know this, you don't feel like, the last thing you feel like doing is being intimate with your partner. And you're cytotoxic 1 week out of 4, and my husband struggled with that. He didn't want to come near me in case I was giving off radiation to him, which again made it a bit of a challenge. But I guess we got through that 6 months, and then I had a few months break and I was back into weekly paclitaxel again. And I thought, oh, here we go, the bloody dreaded paclitaxel. And yes, my hair fell out again, but I thought this time I'm going to hold on. I'm not going to clipper it. We're going to see how much I can hang on to. But by the time I was pulling out, in the shower, these handfuls of hair, I had to give in, and I ended up clippering myself, gauge 4 or whatever it was, and try and keep a little bit of length on top, knowing that eventually it would grow back. But this time I lost all of my eyebrows, all of my eyelashes, all of my pubic hair, all the hair on my head. And I just remember standing in front of the mirror and going, my gosh, I feel like an alien, I almost feel asexual. There's nothing feminine about what I'm looking at right here, right now. And this is the being that hops into bed at night next to my husband. How on earth can he even find that attractive? I can't find myself attractive. So that was probably the lowest part for me. But you get past that, and I've finished the chemotherapy again now, and of course my hair's growing back and everything's kind of getting a little bit back to normal. But the gift that keeps on giving, I guess I'm now at the point where I've developed a lymphedema, which adds a whole nother dimension for me. So I've got swelling down my leg, I have swelling in my pelvis, my genitals are swollen because of the lymphedema. And again, it comes back to, I think, when it comes to feeling and having a libido and feeling like being sexual, nothing about my sexual organs at the moment is sexual. It is just all medical. And to the point where, I'm showing doctors, I'm showing physiotherapists, and there is nothing attractive about that at all. And I guess, I have no sex drive, which probably comes from the medical menopause as well. Probably doesn't help, in all honesty. And I feel sad at times that I've lost that desire, and I've lost that ability to connect with my husband in the way that we used to. And I feel guilty because ultimately I'm married to a 47-year-old man who's at the prime of his life, and he hasn't had any physical changes. And it's not unreasonable for him to expect that he could have sex with his wife of 20 years. Of course he should be able to, but we're just not there. And so we've had to think about what can we do differently, and we are pretty good at talking to one another, and we started to explore what else can we do so that his needs and urges can still be met. And he's very keen to do that for me too, but whereas I sort of say, well, at the moment, I've got nothing. I'm more than happy to just, to lie there and be cuddled by you. I'm happy to go for walks together, and we do, and we go and have lunch together, because we sort of, I guess we've come to this point of realising our life will never be what it once was. It can't be. The journey that we've been on, albeit one we wouldn't like to have taken had we chosen the path, it's changed where we are, and we just have to adapt. And of course, COVID's taught us that, if nothing else. Life will never be what it once was. And so I'm still here. I don't see my scar anymore. I don't notice my port anymore, given the passage of time. And we do things differently. And we basically just embrace the fact that I'm here, and we still have that time together that we can spend together. So I really appreciated too hearing some of that information from earlier this evening, and maybe that'll give us an opportunity to try something new and just explore, as Amanda said, what sexuality is and what it means to us at this point in our lives. So, but thank you, Vanessa. It's been great to be able to give a little bit about my story.
Well, thank you so much, Amy, for giving us an insight into your journey and the challenges that you're facing. I know everyone on this webinar is so appreciative of you just being so open and honest and willing to share your story. I know it's not an easy topic to talk about, so very, very much appreciated. We just have one question, but before we do, someone has said your short blonde hair is absolutely fabulous. So there you go. And I agree. Just one question. Did any of your healthcare professionals talk to you about the impact of ovarian cancer on your relationship and on intimacy when you were first diagnosed?
Yeah, and that's an interesting question, because the short answer is no, really. And I guess I was so blessed, and as Amanda spoke about earlier, that OCA has the teal support program, because the first person that actually spoke to me about this topic at all was my teal support nurse, Di Keneally. And I've seen a lot of health professionals, and you see your oncologist, you see your surgeon, you've got your GP who's there in the mix, but I guess it's a question about who's the right person to talk to you about it, and at what point is it something that you want to discuss. Because obviously at the beginning, when you have your diagnosis, or you go into the into the cancer facility to learn about your treatment and what side effects are going to come, is that really the time you want to be hearing about this? And when you come in after having your surgery and you're lying in the hospital, the last thing you want is, someone coming up and, want to have someone talking to you about, your exercise or, getting up and moving and things. The last thing you want to hear at that point is, well, how is this going to affect your intimate relationship with your partner? So, I don't know. It's a funny point. Who is the best health professional to talk to you, and at what point is the best time for you to hear it? But I must admit, I've really appreciated building up a relationship with Di over the last probably 12, 18 months, and then having that relationship where we can talk about these sorts of things, because again, it's really not an easy topic to discuss with just anybody. And thank you so much to the person who said about my hair. That was lovely.
Thank you, Amy. Just one more question, if you have time. What's been the hardest part of your journey so far?
I actually think probably the hardest part of my journey was hearing that my cancer had come back. Because I guess at the beginning it was very much, I am going through this hell because it's going to make me better. And then to have heard in such a short time afterwards, having been told I was better, to then find out, well, actually cancer's come back, was probably the lowest part that I've experienced, both my husband and I together. And I guess it was good and bad though, because it was the catalyst for me that allowed me to really make that change. And I was really interested to hear Amanda say that about, your thoughts and your patterns, and you're doing the same thing every day. I kind of really came to a point of clarity where I thought, well, if I keep doing the same thing, and living my life the same way, how can I expect a different outcome? So it's really allowed me to open my mind to all manner of alternative not treatments, but alternative approaches, I suppose, that I would never have considered in the past. I'm always have been a conventional medicine person, but I've started meditating, I've started exploring, changing my diet, looking at my spirituality, getting some therapy from a formal point of view, looking, for psychotherapy. And it's really helped me to make the rest of me healthy and in a better position to take on and manage and monitor this cancer, and to have a better attitude towards everything, every facet of my life. So, yeah, whilst it was horrendous, I think it's actually really been a benefit in disguise.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Amy. We will leave the questions there, but just before we finish up, I've had a few comments. Amy's the most poised and well-spoken survivor I've heard. Thank you so much for sharing and your good attitude about life. And just one other I will share. I just want to thank Amy for her honesty and for sharing. I'm in a different stage but have experienced similar thoughts and feelings. You've helped me considerably. Sorry. So thank you again, Amy. We really appreciate you giving up your time and for being so open and honest.
Thank you.
So I just want to say another big thank you to our speakers, Dr Amanda Hordern, Tori Wood-Bellentina and Amy Phillips. We really appreciate the information that you've shared this evening and for giving up your time. I want to say a big thank you to everyone who's been on the webinar this evening. We really hope that you found it valuable. The recording of this webinar will be posted on our website in the next couple of weeks, and you will receive an email with a link to the recording in the next few days. In a moment, you will be directed to an evaluation form. If you could just take a moment to complete that form, it will help us to plan future webinars. Your feedback is extremely important to us. If you have any other questions that you would like addressed, please don't hesitate to contact our information and support line on 1300 660 334. So please don't hesitate to contact us. Thank you again, everyone. We really hope that you found the webinar valuable, and we hope to see you for our next webinar in a few months' time. Enjoy your evening. Good night.